we are so excited to have Ruth Chou Simons here with us today. She is an author, artist, married to her beloved, and a mother to 6 sons. Ruth has a new book out titled Now and Not Yet. Ruth, as gardeners, we are always literally experiencing the now and not yet. And when I heard you reading some passages from Now and Not Yet on your Instagram, I knew that this was a message for our ripen subscribers to help them and me to dig deeper into what God has for us. For folks who have a desire to live a gardening lifestyle that glorifies God, I know that I appreciate your message, and I just really want to share that with our ripen subscribers. So thank you for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
So in Romans 5, we read, we rejoice in our sufferings, knowing that suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope. With gardening, we often experience that spectrum from suffering to hope. Could you please talk about how God's design is often a journey from being restless to truly knowing God's peace through anticipation?
Yeah, I wish I was a successful gardener, but I know that in growing things in the way gardening happens and with all of nature, there are seasons. And a lot of times we just want to skip all the hard seasons, the restless seasons, the suffering seasons. We just want to be in that season where we're all abloom and the fruit is looking luscious and our garden is just really award winning, right? And we just want everything to be in that state. And yet we see, just like in nature and just like in gardening, that God actually uses every season to prepare for the next one.
Yes, that's for sure. So in chapter 4 of your book, that's titled "You Don't Have to Be Blooming to Be Growing," you bring up that Paul, in his message to the Galatians, and that he is reminding them of their freedom of Christ, and how they could only bear fruit by walking in the Spirit, and that it's a reminder and a warning. Though you can always sow right where you are, you must choose what you sow. Could you elaborate on that, please?
Yeah, we can spend a lot of our time doing things that we think are going to be beneficial, but you realize after, well, I'll just say for me, you know, it doesn't take much to suddenly realize I wasted a whole lot of time on social media. I can go, oh, I'm going to go check on one thing, and before I know it, I've spent so much time doing something that ultimately isn't sowing any good seeds in my life and I'm not trying to dog on social media, but we can do this with lots of things, whether it's Netflix or whether it's spending a lot of time worrying or spending a lot of time thinking negative thoughts about our current season. Each of those things can take up a lot of time and end up being it's like actually sowing seeds that aren't fruitful in our own lives. Like, so if I'm sitting around repeating untruths about who I am or who God is or how he feels about me, and those untruths get wedged in my soul, then it takes me away from the fruitfulness of cultivating good soil, cultivating the seed of truth being planted in my heart. It's actually a false seed that ends up kind of disturbing and the peace and turns into the weeds that grow up that kind of have to be dealt with all the time. And so, hopefully that analogy is being used correctly here. But I just think that so often we need to remember that it's God who is in charge of um, causing the harvest to happen. But when we sow, we are sowing with our time and our resources and with our attention, and we get to choose what we're sowing. We can be sowing the word of God into our lives. We could be sowing a life of prayerfulness. We can be sowing ministry right where we are, or we could be also sowing seeds of anxiety. We could be sowing seeds of trying to do things on our own or worrying our way to the next step. And so we get to choose those things.
That's right. Yeah, fear is powerful. And you bring up the social
Mhm.
media, and I think all of us know that there's some beautiful things to look at on Instagram, and we can judge ourselves or even judge our gardens compared to what we see out there that is
Mhm.
happening. So You're right. Instead of sowing bitterness because maybe we don't have yet, we need to keep
Mhm.
we need to keep
Mhm.
our eyes focused on Christ. So you have a beautiful family, and the affinity you have for your man cubs really shows through your writing. What are some key living in the now shifts in perspective that God has taught you through your family?
Well, I'm a mama to 6 boys, and my oldest is 22, and my youngest just turned 11, so I've got several seasons going on at the same time. I'm in the launching adult children season as well as, um trying to cultivate a life of responsibility and encouragement for middle schoolers. We've got all that going on. And for me, a lot of times it's to whether, right now I'm not in the little years anymore, but it started in the little years that I learned not to try to wish away the season I'm in, trying not to skip and go, oh, if I could, on the other side of these nap times and all the discipline problems and or all the difficulties of being like the mom that has to do all the chores and do all the things. On the other end, that's when life's going to begin for me. That's when things are going to be good. And I've learned, sometimes even the hard way to recognize that God is actually using this exact season that I'm in, whether it be those years where all I'm doing is wiping down sticky messes all the time, or the season I'm in right now where um I would like to be on the other side of so many transitions. But what I have right now is the realization that I have adult children and younger children. I am both saying goodbye to children who are no longer living in our home, as well as cultivating a new rhythm with younger ones. And so I'm learning not to wish that season away and to be present right where I am.
I was looking at one of your Instagram posts where you had a picture comparing you in Target with your six sons as compared to
Hmm.
years ago to, probably more recently. And I was like, wow, that would be a lot. I'm a grandmother of 10 grandchildren. So I
Oh,
know what it is to like have a bunch of them, but not always underneath my wing, so to speak, at all times. So that's wonderful. That's a great blessing that you have. And I know even when I have been reading your book now and not yet, it really, I mean, I can see myself in that. And I think it's definitely a book for everyone to be able to read. So you are an artist and have beautiful paintings, floral paintings, landscaping. So has a garden or gardens or God's creation inspire your art?
Oh, well, I would say it's the greatest part of my inspiration. Years ago, before I was an author, because now that takes a lot more of my time running the company, Grace Laced, as well as authoring and speaking. That's taken up a lot more of my time. And so, along with my job as a mama, I've fallen off of my gardening desires. I used to have a beautiful garden when we lived previously in a different state. And so much of that taught me that very phrase that I use often, you don't have to be blooming to be growing, literally came out of a season where I was tending to a lot of plants in the garden as well as plants in my house. And I was always aware of how much you suddenly realize, oh, wait, where did that blossom come from? And that blossom turns into fruit. And I don't think I realized that that was growing already. I was busy just tending to the soil and nourishing. And so I realize it's a process. These days, I don't get to garden and get my hands dirty as much, but I spend a lot of time looking at God's creation all the time. I would say it's the majority of my inspiration. I regularly paint floral and botanicals and even bring in critters from nature because all of it points to a great God who's a better designer than I am.
So is there any something else about now and not yet that we haven't discussed that you would want to share with the ripen subscribers and others?
Yeah, I would just say that your right now really matters and it's purposeful. And that whether in the book, I actually go through everything from seasons of suffering to season of hiddenness and obscurity to times when you're feeling really restless or times of waiting, wandering in a desert. We all go through different seasons, whether it's actual seasons of our lives in terms of our age and life station, where whether we're, experiencing things in our families and in our bodies and our homes. But even just spiritually, as followers of Jesus, we are in between the now and the not yet. We are saved and we're forgiven and free, but we still live on this earth. We spend our days in a broken world and we still wrestle with the sinfulness of our own hearts. And so God is in the business and in the work of sanctifying and changing us, which is really all that as gardeners you understand about cultivation and pruning and shaping something to be in its very best state. And ultimately, that's God's work to shape and grow us and make us more like Him. And so, this side of heaven, we might go through a lot of painful seasons. We might be going through seasons where we don't want what we are actually in the middle of. And yet, we have this hope in heaven that He is making all things new and that we can right now just press in and be faithful right where we are with our shovels in hand, with all the things that He's given us to do right where we are, because it's actually the foundation for all that is yet to come.
Wonderful. Well, Ruth, we thank you so much for taking some time out of your very busy schedule. And I just want to encourage our Ripen subscribers to go out and get a copy of your Now and Not Yet book. It's beautiful. Thank you again. And I so appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.